So welcome everyone to Nevada Policy's webinar about the Nevada legislature now in its 83rd session, which is 2025. I'm Geoffrey Lawrence. I'm the research director at Nevada Policy. I have been covering the Nevada legislature in every session since 2009. So there have been some changes over the years, but the process usually works somewhat similarly. In fact, I worked in the legislature for a brief time in 2015 when Republicans held control of the assembly. I worked as a staffer. So I've been around this for quite a while. Um, Let me start off by giving you an outline of what the legislative process looks like in Nevada, at least along a timeline. So the Nevada legislature is constitutionally limited to a 120-day legislative session. It begins the first week of February, goes to the first week of June. Usually, the governor will present his executive budget and a State of the State address in mid-January. Then the finance committees will begin meeting to start working on the budget ahead of time. But the full legislative session this year began on February 3rd. Lawmakers are still able to introduce new bills for about the first 6 weeks of the session. The deadline this year was March 17th, so that just passed about a week ago. For the most part, incumbent lawmakers would have submitted their bills prior to the beginning of the session, so late last year. But new lawmakers obviously need more time when they're voted in November to get their legislation to legislative staff. State agencies also would have introduced their bills by the end of last year, and those are the first ones to be made publicly available. So at Nevada Policy, we've been going through bill drafts for several months now, beginning with the state agency bill drafts. Typically, over the course of a legislative session, there's between 12 and 1,300 bills. We read them all and produce, for the ones that are relevant to our mission and scope, we produce a series of recommendations, which you can find on our website. And then we later create a legislative scorecard that tracks how every lawmaker voted according to the recommendations that we produce throughout the session as we get the language when it becomes available. So going into April 11th, any bill that is going to survive beyond that point has to have passed its first House committee. So what does that mean? If it's a bill that deals with education in the Assembly, it's probably going to get assigned to the Assembly Education Committee. The committee is going to have a hearing. They'll come back usually a week later and vote on the bill. They have to vote to approve the bill and move it to the Assembly floor in order for it to continue beyond April 11th. The full chamber will then have about another 10 or 11 days to vote it out of the chamber. So if it's going from the Assembly, it has to be transmitted to the Senate by April 22nd this year. And then there's similar deadlines on the other side. So if Senate Education is hearing the same bill, they would have to pass it out by May 16th, and then would have another week to pass it on the Senate floor with the whole chamber. The legislature cannot continue beyond June 2nd in its regular session. If there's business still to be done after June 2nd, then the governor has to call them into a special session. So now that I've gone through all of this, I'm going to throw a big wrinkle by saying that these are just kind of guidelines. They're firm deadlines, but the leaders of each house, the Assembly Speaker and the Senate Majority Leader, can also declare any bill they want exempt from deadlines. And in this legislative session, about 400 bills have been declared exempt. So those bills don't have to meet any of these deadlines. In fact, they can all be passed through both chambers on the final day of the session if that's what the Assembly and Senate leadership wants to do. So nothing is ever permanently dead in the legislature. And in fact, one other technique that gets used sometimes is to uh, take a bill that is still alive, such as one that's been declared exempt, and then delete all the language from it and insert an entirely new bill, as long as it deals with the same broad theme like education or pensions. Then you're allowed to do that and use an old bill as a vehicle for a brand new bill, even on the last day of session. So those are just some techniques that get used in the legislature. I did highlight on here May 1st, the Economic Forum report is sometimes significant because the Economic Forum is responsible for creating the state's official revenue projections for the next budget cycle. It's a 2-year budget cycle, and the legislature is required to rely on their forecast. It's a kind of a nonpartisan panel of experts, and they have to rely on that forecast in order to calculate the budget and balance the budget. So if the Economic Forum comes in May and says there's going to be more money than we previously thought available, that opens up a new window for negotiations between both chambers and between the legislature and the governor's office. Similarly, if the Economic Forum says there's going to be less money available than we previously thought, that also spurs negotiations and frequently a lot of trade-offs with regard to taxes in exchange for collective bargaining reforms or other things. So that's kind of a broad outline of how the legislative process works in Nevada. In this particular session, there's an interesting context, well, a few that I'll talk about. One is that this past election was a little different than any election in the last 20 years, where you had a Republican presidential candidate that carried the state. That hasn't happened since 2004 with President Bush. And President Trump carried the state by 3.1%. But what you don't hear very often is that legislative Republicans outperformed the president. Republican Assembly candidates, for instance, as a group, won 684,000 votes, while Democrats won 632,000 votes. So the Republicans won by a little more than 50,000 votes statewide. That's a margin of about 4%, so almost a point higher than Donald Trump won the state. However, because of the way that districts are drawn, Democrats have happened to have controlled the assembly and at the close of each decade for about the past 4 decades. So they've been able to draw the lines and define the districts. So as a result, Republicans, despite carrying the majority of voters, are almost in a super minority of seats in the assembly. They're 27 to 15 minority. That's one more seat would be a 2/3 supermajority for the Democrats, which would give them the ability to override vetoes and pass tax increases without any Republican support. So that 2/3 threshold is a big deal. But I think what the outcome of this election shows is it puts the Democrats in a strange spot of having a very strong majority and yet not having a popular mandate. So at least in theory, that hampers their negotiating position with the governor. Okay, so I want to talk about some of the key issues that are being debated this session. I'm going to tell you a little bit about education, a proposed film tax credit for economic development, some possible changes to election law, and then I'll wrap up with a discussion about occupational licensing, because there's some promising legislation that's moving down the pipeline there. So when it comes to education, Nevada policy is a big advocate of reforming public schools to introduce market dynamics and competition, to try to bring out the best in educators, to identify who the best educators are and to reward them handsomely to attract them and retain them in the classroom. Because we believe that education, the purpose of public education system is to prepare students for success in life and push them to high levels of achievement. Not that might sound intuitive, but not everyone views education in that way. Some people view it as a jobs program, and well, they simply have other views about what the priorities might be. So we advocate for a reform agenda that includes school choice. So there are a handful of bills that would introduce a choice measure or expand an existing choice option. In 2015, when Republicans controlled both chambers of the legislature, they created a program called Opportunity Scholarships, which allows low-income households to access a scholarship in order to send their kids to a private school if they don't like the public school that they're zoned into. And Nevada companies can donate money to a scholarship granting organization and receive a tax credit in exchange. So it's kind of in lieu of paying taxes, they can finance these scholarships. That program has been very limited since it was passed. Right now, there's an annual cap on the amount of tax credits that can be granted of about $6.65 million. There's a proposal, there was a similar proposal 2 years ago when Governor Lombardo came into office to expand that to $30 million a year and allow it to continue to grow by 10% every year thereafter. That's Assembly Bill 214. That's an important one for us that we'll be tracking, and we're sending out alerts every Monday and Friday to let you know when the hearings on important bills are coming up. Another school choice option revolves around education savings accounts. In 2015, if you were in Nevada, you probably remember that there was a bill became law that would have allowed any family in Nevada, it wasn't means tested, any family that was currently registered, had their kids registered in a public school, would be eligible to get an education savings account, wherein the state basically deposits money into a personal account on the child's behalf, and it can be used for a variety of pre-approved purposes, including private school tuition, in lieu of paying to send them to the existing school. That was the funding mechanism for that caused the court to strike it down, and it never went into effect. But there is a proposal now in the Senate, Senate Bill 252, that would bring that program back and allow it to be funded in the same way as opportunity scholarships, where you have companies that receive a tax credit in exchange for contributing to a scholarship type of organization. And there's a bill, Senate Bill 224, would require any school that is evaluated as being in the bottom 5% of schools in the state for 3 consecutive years, it would require a conversion to a charter school. This is kind of a rehash of another law that was passed in 2015 that created an achievement school district, which was basically a statewide school district run by the State Department of Education that oversaw the transition of failing public schools into successful charter schools. So this would kind of bring that back. And then a couple other bills here. As Senate Bill 253 would just require the State Department of Education to identify and list on their website the highest performing schools. So we're going to recognize who's performing well and who's not, and also do it at the teacher level. So measuring based on student achievement, which teachers are able to push students to greater levels of achievement. They would include that on a website, and it will include not just district-run schools, but also charters. And then it would also allow charter schools to access facilities funds so they could pay for their building and infrastructure. Currently, charters don't get funding for that stuff. One final bill, Assembly Bill 398, would allow districts, so traditional school districts, to pay higher salaries to attract people to harder to fill positions. So one of the things that public schools struggle with is that for it's difficult to find a physics teacher or a math teacher simply because those types of fields have a lot of career options available. And so the people who are good at those and have qualifications tend to have higher earning alternatives than going to teach. Uh, and yet the collective bargaining agreements that are signed with teachers unions have not allowed a variation in teacher pay. So all teachers basically pay the same across the board with a structured tier structure for for annual raises and promotions. This would kind of break that mold and allow, say, a math teacher to be paid more highly than a drama teacher. Okay, so not everyone views education the same way that we do, as I mentioned. So there are a number of what we call counter reform proposals, which would double down on some of the things that school districts already do. Um, At the top, some of the things we're keeping a really big eye on are Assembly Bill 364 and 441, because they would force closure of the Opportunity Scholarship Program that I mentioned previously. That's the choice program specifically for low-income families, those who earn less than 300% of the federal poverty level. Um, Basically, what it would do is would both of these bills would not allow scholarship granting organizations to grant a scholarship to a student who has not already received one in the past, and would eventually force them to return all of their money to the state and shut down. There are a couple other bills that would reduce accountability within public school system. So Assembly Bill 401 would eliminate assessments as a graduation requirement. So Nevada has a test that every 11th grader has to take, and they can take it again in 12th grade, but it's the College and Career Readiness Assessment. It's meant to just ensure that in order to graduate high school, you have the skills that you need to either move on in education or go out and get a job. But you know, a lot of times administrators, unions, other special interests within the system don't like that level of accountability because it makes them look bad if a lot of students are failing the career readiness assessment. So this proposal would eliminate that as a graduation requirement. Senate Bill 411 also would eliminate financial management reviews of school districts by the state, which currently are required to happen every 6 years. And then it would also eliminate the state's ability to review consultant contracts and to evaluate their scope and the contractor performance. A final bill of importance here is Senate Bill 161, which would expressly allow strikes by teacher unions. So at the beginning of the last school year, a lot of people were surprised to find out that without any notice, their kid's school had shut down and they had to take the day off of work unplanned because they couldn't drop their kid off as they hoped to. The reason that happened is because Clark County Education Association, which is the local teacher union, planned a series of sick-ins where all the teachers to a particular school would call in sick the morning of and force the administrator to cancel school for the day. This was deemed later on an illegal strike because teacher unions in Nevada don't have the right to strike. Back in the 1990s, I think it was 91, the legislature agreed to give teacher unions the power of binding arbitration, which means that if the union and the school district don't come to agreement on a new contract, then they each have to submit their best offer to an arbitrator, and the arbitrator picks one or the other, and that automatically becomes law. So they're guaranteed a union contract. In exchange for getting this arbitration power, they gave up the right to strike. So the legislature at that time was trying to protect Nevada families um, from this scenario where you have to, the parents have to unexpectedly miss work and the kids miss school by giving away this power. This new proposal aims to undo that deal and give unions both the ability to strike and the arbitration power. Okay, another big debate that's going on right now centers around making Las Vegas the new Hollywood by attracting some major film studios to Southern Nevada. There are two primary bills, one in the Assembly, one in the Senate, and they're backed by different commercial groups. So the Assembly bill would increase, there's an existing film tax credit in Nevada of $10 million a year. And what this does is it allows anyone who shoots a production film in Nevada to recover up to 35% of their production costs as a tax credit. And that's capped annually at $10 million in total. They get this money up front in what's called a transferable tax credit. So it's basically like a coupon against future tax liabilities. And the producer doesn't have to be the one to use this tax credit. In fact, they can sell it, and they almost always do, on a secondary market. So a casino group like MGM, who is a common buyer of these things, will go buy the transferable tax credit at, say, 90 cents on the dollar, and they'll be able to redeem it against their gaming tax. And the film producer is able to capitalize on the tax credit immediately. They get cash in the door to finance their operation, is kind of how that's supposed to work. The reason the state does it this way is because it would be unconstitutional for the state to just hand cash over to a private interest. That would violate the state's gift clause. So they've invented this transferable tax credit paradigm as a workaround against the constitutional gift clause. That puts it on kind of weak constitutional grounds, I believe, although it has not been, there hasn't been a suit that's challenged these transferable tax credits. They've only been around for about 10 years or so, but both of these bills would expand them dramatically. So the Assembly bill would expand them from $10 million a year to $95 million a year over a period of 15 years. And it would also make available $25 million a year in non-transferable tax credits for any production that's shot outside of Clark County. So in total, you're talking about $1.8 billion or so over the lifetime of this program. And the idea is to incent Sony and Howard Hughes to build a production studio in Summerlin. One of the interesting things about this bill is it specifically names Howard Hughes within the legislative language as the recipient of this benefit. That's not typically how these programs are designed. In fact, I think that makes it a stronger argument that this is a gift clause violation because there's no one else who could qualify to receive this. The Senate bill would also expand the film tax credit up to $83 million a year for 15 years, and then would make another $15 million available in non-transferable tax credits. This is for a different project. It is for a separate studio based at UNLV that would attract Manhattan Beach Studios Group. Now, one of the interesting wrinkles that's come up in the past 2 weeks or so is that this second proposal was previously backed by Warner Brothers, but Warner Brothers has now switched from the Senate bill to partner with Sony on the Assembly bill, and we're expecting them to come back with a new amended version that will combine all of these targeted subsidies into one big bill. So that could be imminent. Okay. On election law, A couple interesting bills out there. So election law was changed dramatically in Nevada during the summer of 2020, ahead of the 2020 election, as a result of the pandemic, when people were unsure if they could go out in public and vote. And so we implemented things like universal mail-in balloting. Previously, you had mail balloting was available, but you had to request the ballot. Now they're sent automatically. It also allowed for ballot harvesting, which had previously been a felony. Ballot harvesting is when an unrelated third party can go around door to door and ask for your ballot and then go remit it on your behalf. Sometimes they can coach you on how to fill in the ballot, which for for some of us, we view that as an infringement of the secret ballot tradition. Where you could have someone harassing you into filling out a ballot a certain way. Um, and so a lot of changes were made then, and some of the legislation being discussed today would at least partially reverse those changes that were made as a result of the pandemic. So Assembly Bill 229 and Senate Bill 103 address mail ballots specifically. So since the mail-in ballot system became live in 2020, Nevada has not been able to timely certify the winner of elections. In fact, in some cases, we've gone almost 2 weeks beyond election day before we could certify a winner. And if you remember in 2022, the control of the United States Senate hung in the balance, and nobody knew who was going to be the new U.S. Senate Majority Leader because Nevada could not certify the winner of its Senate election. So this has become kind of a national problem, and it's become an embarrassment for Nevada. So there's at least some bipartisan concern about this, and there are some proposals to move back the date at which mail ballots are allowed to be received. Right now, it's up until the Friday after Election Day, so an additional 3 days beyond Election Day. These proposals would move back the postmark day for mail-in balloting to the final day of early voting. So early voting goes on for 2 weeks prior to Election Day, the final day being the Friday before the Tuesday of Election Day. So basically move that back by a week and give county clerks more time to count the ballots. Assembly Bill 228 would eliminate the universal mail-in balloting system and go back to the mail ballots by request, which is what we had previously. There are a couple bills relating to voter ID. So last year, 2024, question 7 on the ballot was approved by voters. Would require voters in the future to present a government-issued ID in order to vote in person, or to put a unique identifying number on the return envelope of a mail-in ballot. So that was a constitutional amendment, proposed constitutional amendment. It has to pass twice at the ballot in order to be adopted. So it would have to be approved by voters again next year. But there are a couple bills that would go ahead and adopt this into statutory law this year if they were approved. Senate Bill 147, Senate Bill 422 would both do that. They would also require the Department of Motor Vehicles to issue state IDs for free if a person attests to financial hardship. So it can't be, if you charge people for an ID that is a requirement of voting, that's interpreted by courts as being a poll tax, which is unconstitutional. So there has to be a mechanism for people to get an ID so that they can vote, even if they can't pay for it. All right. Couple bills dealing with ballot harvesting, which I already discussed. Assembly Bill 306 would actually expand ballot harvesting by creating more drop boxes for mail-in ballots around the state. It would create a minimum number of drop boxes per county. and give ballot harvesters additional protections. Okay, Senate Bill 122 would go kind of the opposite direction by requiring harvesters to at least sign an affirmation that they are residents of Nevada when they turn in a ballot. That's not currently a requirement. You could have people who have election workers bust in from California, let's say, who go door to door in Nevada in order to grab ballots and bring them to a drop-off point. This bill aims for, an in-state requirement. Then finally, there's a voter registration bill we find interesting, Senate Bill 205. It would require county clerks to update voter rolls using change of address data that's filed with the U.S. Post Office. So, if you move from Las Vegas to Ohio and you drop a change of address form in the mailbox so that your mail gets forwarded, there's a big database of all those active change of address filings, and election officials could use them to automatically update their voter rolls and purge people from the voter rolls who are no longer active residents of the state. That might sound pretty obvious, but right now county clerks are not required to do that. They have the option of doing it, but it's not a requirement. So that's what this change would be. Okay, finally, I want to end with some good news because I think a lot of the kind of promising legislation that I've discussed at this point has a narrow shot of becoming law in the current legislature. However, there is a bipartisan push right now for major changes to occupational licensing. So Nevada has been derided as the most onerously and extensively licensed state when it comes to occupational licensing. That includes things like really obscure professions. Musical therapist is a type of license that only exists in Nevada and no other state. And other things like interior design requires. So our interior design license, there are only 3 states that have one. It takes 6 years of apprenticeship in order to become licensed. You also have to pay a bunch of fees and pass a test. But there's before you're allowed to practice this profession in Nevada, but there's no risk of physical or financial harm to a person if you give them bad design advice. So, these are really tangible barriers to entry into almost any professional field in Nevada. And for a state that is a destination for a lot of inward migration from California and other places, people wind up moving to Nevada and then they find out they're not allowed to practice their occupation here. Became a big thing during the pandemic. We ran into a big teacher shortage. And so during the 2021 legislature, the legislature began to consider loosening up these occupational licensing requirements. And in 2023, they joined an interstate compact that would recognize teacher licenses that had been granted in other states. So if you were, say, an Air Force spouse of an Air Force person, then if you come to Nevada from Kentucky or Florida, you would be able to go straight to work in the Clark County School District and wouldn't have to spend years getting a separate teaching license in Nevada. Now we're expanding on that concept of recognizing the licenses that have been granted in other states. So a couple of bills here, and I'll just go through them quickly, that are being considered, and I think all of them have a very good shot at passage. They would join interstate compacts like this for physician's assistants, nurses, speech pathologists, physical and occupational therapists. There's another bill that just says occupational therapists separately. There's one for social workers, one for school psychologists, one for dentists and dental hygienists. So these would be promising reforms if they're put into place. There's an even broader one that I like better. Well, it's Senate Bill 121, and it would force all regulatory boards in Nevada to endorse the license that had been awarded by any other state. So if, let's say, a musical therapist, even though this doesn't exist anywhere else, but if a musical therapist licensed in Kentucky came to Nevada, the respective licensing board here in Nevada would be forced to endorse that license, which means that it would basically be reciprocity. And that reciprocity would be universal across all of our different types of occupational licensing. So that would be really promising. I don't expect that one's going to pass, but the interstate compact bills above all have a very good shot. There's also a bill that would allow medical doctors from certain countries like United Kingdom or Australia to come to Nevada and practice temporarily. That's currently not allowed. And then there are a couple bills that go kind of the opposite direction by creating new occupational licenses. There's only really two that have stood out to us so far this session. One would create a license for an emergency medical responder, which is different than an EMT. They just kind of define it separately. And then there's a new license for a genetic counselor, which again is an occupational license that does not exist anywhere else. Um, so with that, I've probably beat you over the head about what's going on in the Nevada legislature quite a bit, and I'll be happy to take any questions that the audience might have.
Geoff, I have two questions here. I'm just going to go in the order of how they were received. The first one is, what's the fiscal notes on SB 252 and AB 214, and will they create an impact on the public schools budget?
All right, I have to go back here. Sure. Oops. I don't remember which ones are. Those are the opportunity scholarship bills and education savings account. I do not know that answer offhand. I will be happy to get it and send it to whoever asked it.
Perfect. And then the next one that I have is regarding the EI. Nevada policy is not tracking AB 228. It's a bill close to repealing the AB 321, and I'm not sure if you have information on that.
No, I have to confess that I am really bad at remembering the bills based on number. So I'm not sure offhand what those are.
Okay, no worries. We have another one. Kelly, just to answer your question, this presentation will be available to review later. We're going to be sending it out with our Friday recap, as well as just for anyone that has registered today. It'll be available for on demand. The next one was from Tammy, who said, all bills that you mentioned are bills that you believe that we should support or just participate in.
I think they're worthwhile to participate in. Not all of them. I mentioned a couple things that I think are red flags. So we wouldn't necessarily support them, but you need to keep an eye on them because things like eliminating the existing opportunity scholarship would be a step in the wrong direction, or creating new occupational licenses. I'm just bringing them up so that you're aware of them.
Great. If I don't believe we have any more questions coming in, I'll give one more moment for that. But just as a reminder for everybody, this is a presentation that we have just put together for the intended purpose of just giving a quick overview of everything that's been submitted thus far. It will be available on demand later this evening, as well as being sent out in our Friday recap email, and it's available to share. There's not going to be a password protector or anything like that. So we're just happy that y'all took a little bit of time out of your day just to come learn a little bit more about the session. And we plan to do a few more updates with the remaining session, especially as the activities in the later half of the session get a little bit more lively. We're hoping to get you up to date with those as well. There are two more questions that came in. Geoff, the first one is, has Nevada policy been following AB 224, which would allow rural school districts to bond through the state for school infrastructure?
Um, hold on. I have to check our legislative
Sure.
tracker to make sure it's on there. No, we do not have that one on there. We will look at it. Thank you for the discussion.
Perfect. And I will be taking all of these questions. I have your emails that if you registered with us, or if you're already in our system, I can and will be addressing them as well as any of the other answers that you might not have received in this session here. We'll be able to follow up with you. And then Iris Stone has just asked Geoff if you're aware, what is a genetic counselor?
Okay. That is a really good question. I was looking at this bill and kind of struggling to um, identify how it's defined. But I'm going to pull it up really quick and uh, see if I can find it. It's in Bill 189. Um, Apologize, bear with me just a second. Okay. Okay, genetic counseling means obtaining and evaluating the medical histories of patients and their families to determine the risk of medical or genetic conditions in the patient, his or her children, or other family members. Um, Goes on from there, but that kind of gives you a broad overview.
Perfect. Geoff, I don't believe we have any other further questions at this time. I don't know if you have any other further closing thoughts, but otherwise, that's the end of our pre-planned programming.
No, well, thank you everyone for taking the time to, spend 45 minutes with us or so and go over what's happening in the legislature. I always tell people that what happens in the Nevada legislature or any state legislature is far more likely to affect your life than what's going on in Congress or internationally, because not only are politics mostly local, but they are, since these policies are enforced at a local level. They're they can be either really big impediments or a great source of empowerment for your life.